So, mass incarceration. So David Garland is a sociologist at New York University. So he's written a book called The Culture of Control that was published in 2001, sounding the alarm. David Garland was the town crier before I became the town crier. Okay, so tonight I'm the town crier. I'm sounding the alarm. But David Garland was sounding the alarm in 2001, mass imprisonment. Okay, so he defines it as a scale of punishment of imprisonment that's discontinuous, both with international comparisons, other countries similar to one's own, and also with the historical development within the country itself. Okay? So the phenomenon of incarceration in the United States today, Jared Moffett was very eloquent and passionate. And I'm passionate too. I don't know if I'm as eloquent as he. But the phenomenon is a historically important political and institutional development in the context of American social policy. It's a major thing. Okay? You heard of welfare reform. That was the legislation in the 1990s where we changed the policies about income support for indigent families. You heard of Medicare. That was the massive program introduced in the 1960s that provided health services through the government's money for elderly people. You know what I'm saying? This is major. This is a fundamental part of 21st century American social policy. The scale of it is enormous. Okay? So this is the first thing that we have to understand. And the data are unequivocal with respect to the discontinuous break from historical practice in the United States and the outlier status of the United States amongst industrial, wealthy countries, democratic countries in the world, in terms of incarceration. So here, you know, in 2001, this is what David Garland was looking at. He looks in the UK, he looks in Europe. He sees that the UK is the leading incarcerator amongst the European countries there. You see the numbers. But there's the United States in 2001. These are people in prison, 686 per 100,000 in the population. As you can see, it's nearly an order of magnitude larger than these other countries. Likewise, if you look at what had been the historical practice, and I'm making the point about mass imprisonment at this point, I'm simply making an empirical point. I'm just observing that something significant has happened. I'm trying to give you the quantitative magnitude of what has happened. Just saying what has happened. There's no normative content so far. I'm simply describing what has happened. You look at the historical practice of the United States. So from 1930 to 1970, with some bumps up and down, the rate of incarceration in the United States hovers around 100 per 100,000, about 1/10 of 1% of the population. When you get to the early 1970s and you extend that curve, I'm not making this up. I didn't smoke something before I plotted this graph. This is what it actually looks like. These are the numbers, okay? So beginning in the early 1970s, a transformation of American social policy around this particular thing, incarceration. Okay? This is coercion. Okay? People are dragooned and they're taken off to the gaol, to the jail. They're taken and they're locked up. Okay? This is force. This is violence. Okay? This is an institution. There are going to be tens of thousands and ultimately hundreds of thousands of people involved. This is an industry. There are going to be billions of dollars at stake and at play. This is political language. Through the decisions and the investments and the whatnot about incarceration, the politician is going to communicate with the polity. He's going to signal. Okay. Toughness is going to be shown. Okay? A determination to do what's necessary to protect you is going to be communicated. Okay? So all this is locked up in this. So that's the scale. Unlike any other advanced industrial country in the world, and unlike anything in our own historical practice. Okay? A person ought to be asking themselves why. Understanding the present, that's my numeral 2 on this outline. What happened? What's going on? How did this have come to pass? What's the root of this? What does it mean? So by the time we get to 2007, we got 1.5 million in prison. We got another half as many in jail. Jails are the local lockups around the towns in the country where people are held prior to trial or where they're held for less than 1 year. That comes to about 2.25 million people under lock and key on a given day in 2007. On parole, let out, early release while in prison, another 800,000, and on probation, convicted and under court supervision, subject to being put in jail if they violate, another 4.2 million, bringing us to about 7.25 million people under supervision, either directly incarcerated or being on probation or parole in 2007. So that's a lot of people, okay? The incidence of incarceration is not evenly distributed in the population. Mass incarceration is a misnomer. Your chances of going to jail, I don't know you that well, but I reckon that they're slight, okay? Drop out of high school, be a racial minority, live in a large urban area. Your chances begin to escalate that you're going to end up having this experience. So, the lifetime civic excommunication that attends being marked as a felon. You've heard of the novel The Scarlet Letter, where the adulteress is branded with the A. You understand stigmata. You understand the sociological function of stigma, the branding of people, the signs. So we have this thing here. They're not branded. They don't carry a number here. But you can go to a database with ease and find out anything you want to know about these people and thereby discriminate against them when you were making a decision about offering a job or not. Because who, after all, wants to hire a felon? They're going to be barred from federal assistance for education, even though perhaps a community college wouldn't be the worst place in the world for an ex-felon to show up. Public housing is going to be foreclosed to them. They can't go home to their mama or their girlfriend if she's living in public housing because the whole family risks being evicted in virtue of the fact that some provision, some regulation will have been violated if a felon, if a convicted felon is found to be resident in the housing. And as was mentioned, in many states their right to vote is temporarily or in some instances permanently taken away. You understand, don't you, that the character of our democracy is being shaped by our punishment institutions, okay? There are two political sociologists at Northwestern called Manza and Uggins, and they have a book about felony disenfranchisement. Manza, M-A-N-Z-A, Uggins, U-G-G-E-N-S. They have a book about felon disenfranchisement in which they do some computer simulations estimating what the outcome of various interesting elections, like the Florida presidential election of 2000, if you remember that one. That one was decided by the Supreme Court basically when they cut off the recount thing and it allowed George Bush to become president. Well, there are several 100,000 African-American disenfranchised persons resident in Florida who could not cast a ballot anymore. How many did Bush win by? 500? You don't need to assume much orientation toward the Democratic relative to the Republican Party amongst minority, low-income, poorly educated voting people. And you don't have to assume a very high turnout rate to have that thing not even be close, okay? Mitch McConnell, the esteemed minority leader of the United States Senate, a senator from the state of Kentucky, Manza and Uggins estimate would never have won the election in the first place if formerly incarcerated persons had been permitted to cast ballots in Kentucky when he was first elected and so on. So, I don't know, I mean, that strikes me as kind of interesting. Blowback. I mean, unintended consequences of the institution. Okay. It's an insidious kind of effect. Oh, but I'll be editorializing if I go down that road, so let me just stop. I just want to try to present you with some facts. Not, and I digress, not evenly distributed, not really mass incarceration, more like a hyper-incarceration of particular elements of the polity. And that's revealed here when you look at the data on incarceration by, broken down by race and by education. This is just very simple. So, you know, the bars are comparing 1980 to 2008, and overall there's been about a tripling in the rate of incarceration. These are per 100,000 in the population in that period, okay?